Welcome back to Let's Talk Adoption. I'm Kim.
And I'm Heather, and we are so glad you're here with us today. If you've been listening for a while, you know we love having open, honest, pretty candid conversations about what really happens during adoption, before, after, really every part of the adoption journey, and for everyone in the adoption triad.
That's right. And today's episode is one we feel is at the heart of every successful adoption story, communication. And today we'll be primarily speaking to adoptive parents who may be at any stage of hoping to adopt, choosing an adoption professional, waiting to be chosen, going through the match, and beyond, even into parenting. These tips will be useful for you.
Absolutely. And I think communication is one of those hallmarks of many successful endeavors throughout life, whether, it was, coming together in your marriage or in relationships with people at work, even, going through school. Communication is so key. And in adoption, whether it's your spouse, your friends and family, your adoption professional, the expectant mother or birth family, and even your future child. Good communication really makes all the difference.
So let's start with the most important team you'll ever be on, you and your spouse. Adoption can be an emotional roller coaster, and if you're not on the same page, it can create stress instead of unity. And everyone pretty much recognizes that adoption is a stressful state. You'll be in a stressed state of being in general, even if everything is going perfectly.
And that's because there can feel like there is a lack of control.
Mhm.
And in reality, there is. You're relying on professionals. You're embarking on something you've probably never done before. And you're trusting and hoping that everything's going to work out. So all of those really have have places where worry can crop up, stress can crop up. And that's then where the communication can be a challenge. And being open and honest with each other about your hopes and your fears and maybe even boundaries is really key. For instance, I've worked with couples where they need to take time to get on the same page with open adoption. Maybe going into adoption, one spouse is more open to the idea of open adoption than the other. And that can come from many different places, including lived experience. Kim, I was speaking to a woman I met at a conference just last week, and she was raised as a child in closed adoption. And she really wanted to learn and understand open adoption because she wanted to be able to communicate that with people she came in contact with, but it was really difficult for her to get past her lived experience in closed adoption. And, I wanted to honor and respect that, but also take the time to communicate that that just is not how we see adoption happening anymore. So what I really what I really appreciated was her taking the time to learn and being open to really have that conversation because that can be tough. And certainly, we're talking here about spouses. It might feel tough and uncomfortable when you aren't on the same page, and maybe those differences don't pop up until you're talking to an adoption professional. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But, you know, talking those things through early um, can really set the stage for, I think, a little more success later on because you might find that just starting the adoption process, there may be things you don't agree on, but it may come from a place of learning. You just need to learn more about it and not stay with what you know, whether it's from lived experience or from movies and TV, from, what you've seen and heard from others, maybe one person that adopted a certain way. Those are things that, we do need to take the time to talk through, and we need to be sure that we are open to learning more about alternatives to our own beliefs.
That's right. Because coming into adoption and navigating from point A to point B and beyond, it often comes with a paradigm shift.
Hmm.
And that paradigm shift comes from knowledge. Knowledge is power. This is going to happen to people at all stages of hoping to adopt and even parenting, that paradigm shift. And it's not always something that feels comfortable. But one thing that can really help is when couples are learning together. I've talked with families where, let's say it's the wife. She is leading the pack on the research. She is immersed in it. Every day she's listening to adoption podcasts, webinars, she's reading the books. Sure, she's, giving her husband the cliff notes, but he's kind of trailing along and he's not getting all of the education that she is. And when it comes to making decisions, she's more confident because she has all the education and she's
Hmm.
been immersed, right? And I'm not saying you both have to be obsessed with it. Certainly, as a married couple, you're a team, right?
Hmm.
And some people excel at the research, but really be purposeful and maybe listening to a webinar together. Maybe if you're the researcher and that's the thing that you enjoy out of the two of you, you're the one that is hungry for information. You're like an information junkie. No matter what it is, you're the one that's doing the research. Then maybe like pick and pull a couple of the podcasts that were most impactful for you and, set aside that 30 or 45 minutes, maybe on a drive or while making dinner together, that you can both listen to that and discuss and learn together. So it puts your spouse at a disadvantage if you're not both learning, right?
Hmm.
And that one spouse is just, I trust I trust my spouse to make good decisions and I trust the research he or she is doing. So, yep, I'll go along with it. But sometimes the decisions you have to make, they can be difficult if you don't truly feel in your heart that that is the right choice to make. And that can come from you need that education. So try to learn and grow together in this. And I think that is going to help you stay united. And regular check ins, almost like little adoption date nights, like the cooking the dinner and the playing the podcast that you've curated, are a great way to make sure that you're aligned.
Hmm. That's right. So
I want to also
go ahead.
mention, Heather, that when it comes to communication, and this is primarily, well, I guess this can be used as just something to keep in mind at any stage in parenting, even after adoption. But sometimes one spouse will be carrying more weight than the other in the
Hmm.
adoption. And that one spouse is the one doing the research, driving the home study forward, reminding them they need to get their paperwork done, the one putting pen to paper on all the paperwork that you need for your home study, the one creating the profile and sitting at the computer, writing out those words, editing the photos, and the one acting as main point of contact with the
Hmm.
adoption agency and then subsequently the birth mom. And that can be stressful and it can allow the more passive spouse to kind of be pulled along with the current rather than truly being a part of that. And that can create resentment on both sides. So it's good to kind of see that that is something that happens with couples and to understand that coming into it. And that's why listening to a podcast like this is a good thing because you're getting the benefit of everyone's hindsight, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And you can kind of prevent some of that from happening or at least discuss it and recognize that if you are the one that tends to be the more proactive one, maybe try to let your spouse know that hey, you'd appreciate a little more teamwork in certain areas, and that you'd really cherish going through these milestones together, and you would
Mm-hmm.
value your spouse's presence in filling these out together, um, and not approaching it as something like, well, you need to step up to the plate.
Right, because
Right?
this may be the dynamic in your marriage,
Yeah.
and that's okay because
Hmm.
we all have different gifts. I'm thinking about myself. I'm better on the computer. I'm better with the editing of those things. Um, and so naturally that would probably fall to me. And and so that dynamic may exist, but you want to be sure that if you are that person, that you're not taking it all on. You are still circling in and including your spouse as you go through the process. Because I think, especially maybe for women who are a little more type A, it may be, or I guess men who are type A, they may be though, I'm powering through and getting this done for us. But, you know, there can also be um, that can sometimes not have the opportunity for the conversations that need to happen. I think of a family I worked with many years ago, Kim, who that's kind of how they were. The husband was the one who was motivated to adopt and did everything, and they never got to have the conversation they needed to have, which was they were not both aligned with the desire to be parents through adoption until they had to make that decision. And that's when the wife finally felt she had the opportunity to speak up. It just hadn't come up because he was doing all the things. So, it's good to, even if one of you is that leader and doer, make the time and make the opportunities to be sure you're aligned. Now, another area I think communication really plays into in adoption has to do with our friends and our family, and maybe even more so our family than our friends. Um, and this can kind of be a tricky area because you've done all the research. You and your spouse have shared what you've learned, and you're having that good communication. But suddenly you learn that not everyone understands modern adoption or international adoption or foster adoption. They don't know what you know. And they may not know the right words to use, the right questions to ask, or they might even say things that, if you're a little sensitive, if you still have a little bit of a wound for that, you know, infertility, may come across as hurtful.
Hmm. And sometimes even well-meaning people can inadvertently make those
Mhm.
comments that
Mhm.
hurt, and it's never their intent. I mean, I will say 99% of the time
Right.
you don't have someone that you're confiding in about your adoption journey that is setting out that morning to hurt you,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
That's not their intention. But that's also why setting boundaries and sharing your preferences for how these conversations will go is important. For example, you might explain that you prefer the phrase expectant mother or birth mother instead of real mother. Now, you've learned about positive adoption language, and you know that saying to anyone real mother is not accurate, because then you, as the adoptive mom, what are you, fake? You're not a figment of someone's imagination. No,
Right.
you're really adopting this child.
Mhm.
really are mothering this child. You really are that 24/7 person that is this child's mother. You're not, you know, not a
Mhm.
real mother. And so something like expectant mother, birth mother, biological mother can be a phrase that is more accurate and not hurtful, right? Not
Right.
confusing as well if the little tiny ears are there listening as well, the child.
Right.
But you may educate your support network, your friends and family, on positive adoption language. You may send them a webinar that you feel is a good one. I know we have a great webinar that Heather and I did a while back. It's called Modern Christian Adoption. And I think that that is definitely a great resource for anyone who is encountering anyone who may be touched by adoption. And you can just
Mhm.
simply Google, modern Christian adoption, or email us and we'll send you the link to
Yeah,
it. It's a webinar. It's done a while ago, but it's very relevant.
right. And don't be afraid to educate them. You've educated yourself. And they're if they're talking to you about adoption, that really is an opportunity to help educate because, you know, eh, and I've said it before, Kim, it's one of those things that is still so baffling to me after working in adoption for nearly 25 years that so many people, even young people who weren't alive in the 50s and 60s, believe that adoption today is still like it was then, or that adoption is like foster care. People don't know what adoption is like today. So, this will open the door for you to share that, to help shift cultural beliefs around adoption, and don't be afraid to do that. And if you're talking to people, especially back to friends and family, most of them will want to be supportive. They just need a little guidance on how to do it. Now, I I know that many times we hear things like, "Well, you want to adopt, there's so many waiting kids out there." And absolutely, we've talked about the thousands of children waiting to be adopted through like adoptuskids.org. Absolutely. And there are parents who adopt that way and they do it successfully and they truly provide a home to a child that really needs a family. But a lot of couples who may be turning to adoption after fertility treatments haven't worked, they may be hoping for a baby or a young child. They may not see their first child as a 12-year-old who's come from a very traumatic upbringing. And they may not feel equipped to parent a child like that because they've never parented anyone before. So when you get that comment, "Oh, I heard there's thousands of kids waiting to be adopted," you may have to be the one to share, yes, there are. And that's one route to parenting. Another route is through, domestic newborn adoption. And so that may put you in that place of education. You may also encounter people who still think there's orphanages in the US. Just saying. And there's not. So, you will be amazed sometimes the questions or comments you will get. And I just always tell people to really kind of going back to what you said, Kim, know that they are 99% well-meaning people who are just not educated about adoption and are not aware that the things that they're saying, aren't accurate and might hurt every now and then.
hmm Now you can give them a job too. You can let them know how to best support you,
Yeah.
right? So this can help when they are not understanding how you have zero control over the timing of adoption,
Mhm.
and they want to know when you're going to go pick up the child and why hasn't it happened yet. And they may be asking this based on one adoption story that they know, or one personal experience they've heard of or seen in a movie. And they think every adoption is identical to that. So certainly you just go pick up the child, or the agency just calls you the next baby that pops up, right? But that's not reality in modern adoption, and especially in private domestic adoption where you're waiting to be chosen by a birth mother. So it's good to help them understand how to support you. So if you want to prepare them that, hey, when we get the call, we might have to travel suddenly across the country. Would you be able to come take care of the dogs? Would you be able to come water the plants? If I got a call like that, could I drop, if it's your mom, let's say, would you be able to come stay with the other child or children that you're parenting? And of course, everyone's parenting plan for when you travel to pick up a baby, it's all going to be, your own personal choice there. But sometimes the easiest thing to do is, let's say you've got a 7 and a 10-year-old at home already.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your mom or your sister can come stay in the home and shuttle the children to and fro and help them stay on their normal routine while you are in the other state totally focused on that adoption and everything it requires of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a job that you can give them. You can also ask them to share your, profile on social media perhaps, or any number of things, but think about what you can give them to do, and certainly prayer and praying protection over your path. Instead of thinking worry, praying protection would
Mm-hmm.
be a very important job for them to have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I like
And
that, Kim.
and thank you. And you would also want to, when you're communicating with friends and family, or just the stranger at the market that you strike up a conversation with, be protective over your adoption experience and the information, because while this is your experience, it's your child's story, it's your child's information, your future child's information, and it's the birth mother's personal story. So be protective over that and understand confidentiality. Not
Mm-hmm.
everyone has a right to every detail. And if you think about things from the birth mother's perspective, she might appreciate how protective you'll be over her choices that she's made leading up to this point.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I want to speak for a moment about our sponsor, the Lifetime Adoption Foundation. It's a nonprofit that exists to give back to the people most deeply impacted by adoption. For birth parents, the foundation offers educational scholarships, a way to invest in their future after placing a child for adoption. For those considering adoption, there are free resources and support tools to help them explore their options with clarity and care. And for children who may be more difficult to match with adoptive families, like older kids, siblings, or those with special medical needs, the foundation provides grant funding to help make those adoptions possible. You can truly make a difference. Learn more or donate at lifetimeadoptionfoundation.org.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Talk about communication with your adoption professional. And this can be a big one. You know, your adoption professional is your, or should be, your guide through the process. And you know, they can only guide you if you're keeping those lines of communication open. Now, I I mention that because I will say they're not mind readers, and and you will have to ask questions if you have them, because that's just, they're not, they're gonna tell you what they think you need to know. But if you have questions, by all means ask. This is one of those areas where the old adage, there's no stupid questions, that really applies here, because most adoption professionals understand that families have not, for the most part, adopted previously. So they don't have experience to draw on. So they are typically experts at asking most any question around adoption. On the other side, if you have updates, you need to share those updates. It is very important. If something changes in your life, it can affect your ability to adopt. Let me give you a great example. Um, we had, Kim, a family one time we were working with, who we called because we had a birth mother who chose them. And that's when they told us they had moved. And it's like, wait a minute, you moved? Yes, we moved. Well, did you talk to your home study provider? No. So now we had a family who a birth mother had chosen, whose home study was totally invalid because it was written for a home they no longer lived in. So sharing updates in your life is vitally important. Similarly, sharing things that sometimes might be difficult to talk about. And that could be um, trouble in your marriage, you know, um, trouble, not really trouble, but a medical diagnosis, you know, um, uh, you know,
Finances.
finances, definitely finances. These are things that you need to also talk to your adoption professional about because they do affect your ability to adopt. They may not affect your legal ability to adopt, but if they are things that are going to affect your home study, or maybe you and your spouse just aren't on the same page anymore. We encounter every now and then couples who decide during fact I had one not too long ago. They had only been waiting to adopt just a handful of months and made the decision to divorce. Um, it's really important that you communicate with your adoption professional because all of those things can affect your ability to adopt and how your professional is representing you as a waiting adoptive family to the birth parents that they are encountering.
And I you need to understand what the expectations are with
Mhm.
how communication will work with your adoption professional,
Definitely.
what they're going to expect of you, and what is reasonable to expect of them. So you may want to ask calling, texting, scheduled appointments, emails. What's the best way for me to be in touch with you when you're starting a relationship with an adoption professional? You definitely want to know how often they're at their desk able to, respond to you. What's that timeliness like? Do they respond within a day or two, or is it okay with them that they respond within a week or two?
Hmm.
Are they out in the
Definitely.
field a lot and they're simply out at home visits? They're out at hospitals, and it's not reasonable to expect an email back within an hour that afternoon because maybe for 2 days they're on the road, not even at their desk. And when they do make it back to their desk, they are documenting everything that happened and kind of playing catch up, right? So
Hmm.
you want to know, like, what's a realistic expectation? Are they going to do monthly check-ins with you? What can you expect? Um, and so having a good conversation about that, if they haven't been proactive in telling you that, I think it's a reasonable question to ask. What's our expectation on communication? And I think that will definitely help because there are many families out there that when they share their adoption story, part of it is, well, we hadn't heard from our agency in 6 months and suddenly we got a call. Or we were matched and for 2 months we didn't hear from anyone, so we didn't really know if it was on or off. So establishing and understanding what you can expect, I think, is important when it comes to the agency or adoption professional. And, you know, remember, like Heather said, adoption professionals aren't mind readers. So all of those life changes and circumstances are important to share, even if it's uncertain. I know, Heather, over the years, we totally welcome when someone may say, hey, there's a little upheaval at work.
Right.
We might have a big change in our situation, or, we had a layoff and we're looking for a new job, or our parents are sick. So if we're not as responsive as we normally are, that's what's going on, or
Right.
we lost a family member, or even we lost our cat,
Right,
you know?
absolutely.
Mhm.
Military service comes to mind.
Yeah. Mhm.
Deployment, you know, those types of things, and that communication can be just, I mean, it is so very, very important. So, just I think Kim a good message is err on over communicating
Mhm. Yeah.
with your adoption professional, and you know, I like what you said about expectations. Ensure that, that's, I guess when we're talking about over communication, we're talking about us as we work in the field of adoption.
Yes.
Definitely any adoption professional you're working with, you want to know, what are their expectations and what do they want and expect from you. We want over communication.
I
So,
actually was thinking about that as we were preparing for this.
mhm,
I was like, well, I know for us, definitely over communicate. That doesn't mean text
yeah.
us every day or anything like that. But
No.
if you
No.
think maybe is this something I should be saying or maybe is this something I should be asking? I mean, yes, do.
Yes,
Uh-huh. And we can let you
definitely.
know if it's irrelevant.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, let's switch gears a little and talk about communication with, I'm going to say birth mother. We're talking about, expectant mother prior to placing her baby, afterwards. Communication with her is certainly something very close to our hearts. Um, Communication with her will really lay the foundation for what your lifelong relationship looks like, whether it is, ongoing contact, keeping her updated through pictures, texts, video chats, getting together for a visit, or maybe it's about just respecting her wishes for what she does want. That communication, um, before the adoption, if possible, really clarifies expectations, and it gives you the guidelines on how to successfully navigate this relation from a communication standpoint.
Absolutely. Trust is built through honesty, respect, and I think specifically when it comes to the connection with you and birth mom, consistency is key.
Hmm.
Even if it seems like she's not as consistent on her end, you should remain as consistent as possible in your communication and what you've promised, especially. Even small things like following through on your promised updates or being sensitive in how you talk about adoption can mean the world to her.
Hmm. Definitely. And I think it's always good to keep in mind that a birth mother is making one of the most difficult and loving decisions that any of us can make in life. And obviously, we're kind of talking about domestic adoption here, where a mother's choosing adoption. But providing that clear, compassionate, consistent communication really is the way that adoptive parents can reassure her that she's she was she was right in making this decision for her child. She made uh, that decision from the right place, and she's being honored and respected and embraced as she wished in the situation too. And that cannot be underestimated. I think it really, um, I think is one of the most important things that adoptive parents need to ensure they're doing, not just for their birth mother, but for their child also.
And part of the reason that consistent communication is so meaningful to birth moms, especially after the adoption, is it's not just about knowing what's going on with the child and how the child is developing and knowing the milestones, although that's certainly meaningful to most women who have chosen adoption. Your consistency means that you're thinking of her. It means she hasn't been forgotten.
Hmm.
And that is deeply meaningful to so many birth moms. And they've shared that with us over the years that, after the adoption, they still kept in touch with me. And that is something so important because it's going to also impact your relationship with your child. And speaking of that, let's talk about communication with your child. Nice little
Right.
segue there. Um, Communication certainly doesn't end once the adoption is complete. Maybe it'll, ebb and flow, and maybe with your adoption professional, it'll wind down. You may choose to send some updates at Christmas or Easter, or we love getting first day of school, graduation from high school, sports achievements. We love getting those updates from adoptive parents. Um, but certainly communication is ongoing, and it's just the beginning. Talking with your child about their adoption in age appropriate ways is so important. And I know that Heather, you and I, through our years of working in adoption, have some, really good kind of rule of thumb when it comes to communication with a child. And the most important thing is to have that communication about their adoption from the very beginning, day one.
From the very beginning. And we talked about it just a few weeks ago, the research that shows that children who grow up with that honest, open conversation about their adoption, they're able to grow up with a stronger sense of self, a stronger sense of knowing who they are. They are more confident, they are more secure, and that it's not a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing dialogue that grows and changes as your child grows and changes. And those questions, they definitely change over time. And the reason we say start from the very beginning is also so that you as adoptive parents get more comfortable telling the story. The more that story is told and is natural, it will be easier. And so to practice on that newborn in your arms really sets the stage as you start talking. And books too. Building a library of children's books. Start with board books that tell stories of adoption. Really will normalize it in your home.
And we share valuable insight regarding communication with your child in our previous episode. It is called What Research Really Says About Open Adoption. Mm-hmm. A big focus of our conversation on that episode is the adoptee experience and how the parents play a role in those conversations and how that mm-hmm. impacts the child. And if you've practiced good communication with your spouse, and by the way, we have an upcoming episode where we're going to dive a little further into the communication with your spouse when it comes to adoption. But if you've been practicing good communication with your spouse, your adoption professional, your child's birth mom, and your extended family and everyone involved, those positive patterns will naturally flow into how you talk to your child too.
Right. So I think wrapping up here, I think the biggest lesson from today is really that communication isn't just a tool. It isn't just talking. It's the foundation of a healthy adoption. I was going to say journey, but almost more healthy adoption life, because it's not a one-time event. It has shifted into who you are as a family and how your family was formed. And when we have good communication throughout the adoption process, before and after, it's just an easier and healthier way to be.
And I hope that some of the things that we've shared today prepare you to be very intentional in your communication with these different parties to your life and adoption, your spouse, your family, your adoption team, the birth mom, the child, because open and honest communication builds trust, reduces stress, and strengthens relationships.
Mm-hmm. So thanks so much for joining us today on Let's Talk Adoption. If you have any comments or anything you'd like to hear us talk about, any guests you'd like to have us talk to, go to letstalkadoption.com and send us a note there. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you found today's episode helpful, remember to subscribe, and you can share this with a friend. You can also leave us a review.
So we will see you next time. And remember, adoption is a journey best traveled together. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Adoption. If you'd like to learn more about today's episode, please visit letstalkadoption.com. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss a conversation. Until next time, take care and God bless.